Hey beautiful people, welcome back to Angelic Embrace, where we document and narrate the glorious and life-changing near-death experiences sent in by you guys. It is greatly appreciated. So sit back, relax, know that you are loved, and let's get into today's near-death experience story. Consider subscribing and watching to the end to find out what happens. I became aware of my surroundings because I was experiencing extreme nausea along with a dull ache in the lower left chest area and in my left arm. My best guess was that it was food poisoning, but maybe not, considering that I experienced food poisoning between 6 and 10 times when I was living in Denver for the past 3 years. I don't recall the precise number of times that I went back to sleep, but I know that I did. I ended up waking up a total of 3 more times, the most recent of which being at about 2 in the morning. My left arm was in such excruciating pain that I wanted to amputate it because I could not take the discomfort any longer. I was unable to stand up any longer due to my weakness. I shouted at Valerie to start the car and get ready to drive me to the hospital so I could get some medical attention. Because the ache was too much for me to bear, I had no choice but to lie down on the floor of the lavatory. I couldn't get the strength to stand up. During this moment, I felt that I was going to die, so I prayed to Christ, asking him to forgive me and to save me. Valerie has just entered the room and is going to take my blood pressure. I was able to push myself up onto my knees and get up off the ground. Instantaneously, the agony became even worse, and I went down again. I had the mistaken impression that passing away wouldn't be as agonizing as it actually was. Valerie ran upstairs to get Larry and Vanetta so they could assist in getting me back on my feet and into the car after I had fallen. Because this was not working, Vanetta screamed for someone to call an ambulance. Within 3 to 4 minutes, the EMT paramedic asked me about the degree of discomfort I was experiencing. On a scale from 1 to 10, with 10 representing the most severe agony, I informed him it was either a 9 or 10. I was shivering, hot, dehydrated, and worn out from the ordeal. The emergency medical technician provided me with baby aspirin and instructed me to chew them up right now. I tried to move but I was unable to, and I told him that. In response, he said, "Sir, you have to chew them up right now." I had to push myself to take the aspirin, and thereafter, I felt like a new person. I stood up. I couldn't help but get to my feet. Regrettably, I once again had severe agony in both my chest and my left arm. When it was time to transport me to the ambulance, the paramedics secured me in a chair device and strapped me down. After that, someone assisted me onto the trolley, and then they loaded me into the ambulance. After removing my shirt, the emergency medical technicians inserted 2 IVs into my arms. After that, we drove the last 4 kilometers to the hospital. I told the emergency medical technician that the discomfort was growing significantly worse. I found myself at a different location all of a sudden. I was aware that I was entirely and wholly present in this location, and it was excellent. I was aware that I was still entirely myself despite not having a body. I was conscious of the fact that every deed, circumstance, incident, or choice I had made in my life was crystal clear and easily recalled, and that it was and is all a part of me. I became aware of a brilliant light above me and somewhat to the left of where I was standing. The light was unfathomably brilliant in comparison to anything else I could possibly conjure up in my mind. Because it was so brilliant, my first instinct was to try to shield my eyes from it by turning my head away. I found myself in the light, where there was neither darkness nor explanation. In addition, I was aware that this location was ideal. There was just the right amount of heat. Because this was the energy that gave birth to the universe, I was also aware that the light possessed a power that was immeasurably superior to that of the entire cosmos. There were colors and shimmering coming from around the borders of the light, despite the fact that there actually weren't any edges because the light covered the entire region and saturated every part of my existence. I thank God that I was able to pray and seek forgiveness before I arrived here, since this is the reason I am here. I was struck by the profound realization that it is not about what you have done. Christ fulfilled this obligation, and it was for you and for everyone else. You are secure. I really wish I could describe this information that has been passed on to me, but it is simply beyond my comprehension. I felt it deep down in my heart and in every fiber of my being that I was secure. I was aware that I was myself, and that God was there with me in this location, as well as having complete understanding of where I was, what I was, and who I am. The moment I arrived in heaven, or more accurately, on its periphery, time stood still for me. I was not equipped with the same understanding of time that we have here on earth. In addition, I did not feel the need to survive, to continue living, or to take the following breath. There was no longer any instinct to survive. I did not fear anything and felt complete serenity. When I turned my head away from the light, I could smell linen made of 100% cotton. It's important to point out that I stopped having a sense of smell around 6 years ago. On this planet, I don't even detect the scent of gasoline. In spite of this, I found myself amazed and perplexed in this location due to the fact that I am fully aware that I lack the ability to smell. I saw a fleeting sight of a substance in front of me, but it appeared far away, and I was unable to identify what it was or figure out what it was. As I proceeded further, I had a fleeting glimpse of a design woven into the linen that was really detailed. The moment I caught a sight of this design in the linen, I realized that I already knew all there was to know about it, including the string that was used to produce the weave and the process of manufacturing the linen weave. I was aware that this linen had been meticulously crafted using only pristine, unadulterated components at every stage of the production process. Suddenly, I was brought back to my body, and I observed the emergency medical technician through my own eyes. I was in excruciating pain, and my heart was breaking. My watch started ticking again, and I became acutely aware of the passage of time as we made our way to the medical facility. I questioned the paramedic, was I out? He responded by saying, "You coded, sir. Do you have any recollections at all?" I could not continue speaking because the agony was too intense. Now we will go on to our second close call experience. It took place in the summer when I was 11 years old, on a lake in the Arkhangelsk region of Russia that had the unpretentious name Abazero. This lake was formed by glacial activity. After struggling to stay afloat and putting up as much of a fight as I could, I ended up drowning. My mother and my aunt were located approximately 40 meters away from me. I yelled, "Help! Help!" as loud as I could. When I tried to take a breath, I accidentally choked on some water, and each time it got worse. My strength had run out, and I was losing more and more resistance with each passing second. I was able to hold my breath for as long as I could, but eventually uncontrollable breaths started coming in. At first small breaths, then deeper and deeper, and I started to sink to the bottom while taking water into my lungs. I struggled to hold my breath for as long as I could. I observed someone plunge into the water roughly 2 meters below when I was swimming at a depth of around 2 meters. It ended up being my mother all along. Because of her blue dress, I was able to recognize her. After mustering up my remaining strength, I made an effort to climb, grabbed her legs, and attempted to climb over my mother. I did this by clasping my arms and legs together, as if I were climbing a tree. Once I was on my stomach, I drowned my mother without realizing what I was doing while I was inhaling water continuously. My strength had completely left me, and I was unable to ascend any further. I was so thirsty that I couldn't help but gulp down large mouthfuls of water. My lungs suddenly stopped releasing little bubbles of air. After that, a thought came to mind. Now I'll die, 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 now I'll die. It began to hammer like a hammer of panic and despair. Now I'll die, 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 now. After holding on to my mother with all of my strength, including my arms and legs, I suddenly found that I was unable to move. After having the thought that breathing is pointless, I stopped taking water in through my mouth and letting it out through my nose. The question subsequently asked was, why am I still here? Why am I still here? Why am I still here? I saw something that looked like a film tape with frames, but in each frame there was a recording of an event, complete with sounds, smells, and even particles of dust. This tape moved from the right to the left, and I was able to pause any event and view it by scrolling and stopping, giving me the impression that I had entered the scene and was experiencing the warmth of the sun and the breeze. When everything that had happened was taken into consideration, I still did not have an answer to the question, why did I live? As I advanced the tape, I was able to see how I had driven a large rusty nail through my hand. After that, I could feel a light tingling coming from the tips of my toes, hands, and head. I was in a lot of pain. It was a familiar feeling, like when they checked flat batteries with their tongue when they were children and the voltage was 4.5 volts, but it was much weaker. There was a sensation that a feeble current was flowing from all of the cells to the chest region, specifically to the spot where one points with their hand when saying I. Ossification started to set in on my limbs. I no longer felt them. The idea that now I will die, now I will die, now I will die, now I will die kept popping into my head again and again. And at that very instant, I exited my body through the back up to the level of the chest, where I was greeted by both my mother and my physical form. I had the thought, finally, it's over for me, that there is nothing else to compare it to was such a relief to me. As I moved away from my body in the water, I was able to see everything around me clearly, and it was gradually getting further and further away. I was still looking at the body as well as my mother from a distance of approximately 5 meters when I said my final goodbyes and rejoiced. Finally, I died. After that, I dove into the hole that was only slightly larger than I was. It was pitch black everywhere you looked. When I thought about it, I pictured a wall or plane with a gap in it. Through this circular hole, I could still make out my body, but there was no longer any water in the area. Instead, there was only total darkness. As I moved away, I noticed that I was moving through a dispersion of particles, as if I were moving through a light fog, and I started turning in the direction of movement to the right. As I turned around, I noticed a glow that was slightly yellowish due to the dispersion of light particles. As I made my way through these clouds of particles toward the light, I was overcome by an overwhelming emotion that I can only describe as love. The nearer I got to the light, the more joy and warmth it brought into my being. Then I was able to make out a voice saying, "It is not yet your time." I was instantly redirected by an unseen force, and my flight speed was increased by a factor of 10 compared to what it had been. I was able to escape through the hole into this world and eventually found myself in the water. However, the body was no longer there. I turned around and saw that the body was being dragged ashore and that the legs were dragging along the bottom, leaving furrows in the sand. I immediately flew to the left heel and, frozen for a moment in front of it, was surprised at how large it was and what an interesting pattern of papillary lines it had. I then flew to the right heel and saw that the legs were dragging along the bottom, leaving furrows in the sand. I was about the size of the lens in an eye. Grains of sand and small pebbles curled around the heels. They sparkled interestingly in the rays of the sun, and I watched the circling grains of sand, then looked at the heel of my left foot, moving after it. I was about the size of the lens in an eye. After entering the body by flying, I turned around with my eyes facing upward and felt myself deteriorate into smaller and smaller particles as they spread throughout the body. When I felt my body again, I was overcome with the same joy that I had felt moments before I passed away. My mother and my aunt restarted the heart and pumped water out of the lungs while I closed my eyes and watched them from a distance while the person's lungs were filled with water, and the person's heart was not beating. When I started to feel water coming out of my lungs, I formed my lips into a tube and began to let them take turns having a fountain of water poured into their face. I could feel the water flying out of my lungs. It gave me a chuckle. During the time that they were attempting to revive my body, I found myself amused and having a good time with them. After extracting me from the water, they moved aside, leaving me in close proximity to the body of water. Due to the fact that it was so enjoyable there, a small part of me wanted to go back and drown myself. As it turned out, I was the one who dragged my mother completely under the water. She raised her hand in the air as a final gesture of hope that our aunt would come to our rescue. Her hand was already more than 1 meter below the surface of the water. My aunt ran up after my mother, but after she did, the depth of the water where the cliff began was up to her chest. She bent in the water over the cliff and reached under the water with her fingertips, and as a result, my mother pulled us out of the water using her fingertips. Death jolted me awake as suddenly as if I had been sleeping for 11 years, during which I was completely carefree.